Wow, COVID, this pandemic has really opened up a lot of people's eyes with regards to the importance of data, data quality, data standards, transparency, accessibility, and timeliness. In a global pandemic, there are so many different individuals that need access to this data, let alone the public who is thirsty for information about what's going to happen to their families, their colleagues, their friends and family, right? And I think a couple of things that have really become clear is that the handling of information around something like this is really key. And it really is dependent on very clear processes that demarcate the whole transaction of data, how it's collected, how it's measured, what the definitions are, and how it's going to be used. We know across many of the state and local governments, the standards for collecting who's sick, the number of cases, who's dying from COVID. They may sound pretty clear, but it's not when it comes down to actually measuring it. And when you get into details of who's sick, there could be a number of ways that people got sick, and how you collect that information and make sure it's consistent across all entities, that's really key. And there was not really a coordination process for that, not a sound one. We're still hearing stories of certain cities and states who have different ways of measuring it, so the numbers are changing. This causes concern to the public and folks in government as well who are trying to manage it, because you don't know what you're dealing with. And in terms of research, understanding, the effects of the pandemic, how it's spreading, what you need to be aware of next, and what are certain risk mitigation strategies that can be employed, let alone resource management across the government. All of those things are compromised when you don't have really good data. So I would hope in the future, there is more delineation of process and ownership around that. I know we had some standards with the CDC in the midst of the pandemic. The collection of that data was shifted to another agency, HHS, which midstream through a pandemic like that, I'm not for sure what the reasoning was, but a week later, they reversed that decision. Again, that is compromises integrity, and it makes everybody a little uncomfortable about what the numbers are really going to mean when they're reported out. And we need to be credible, report credible data to the public and to our allies. What's really exciting for me, having the role of leading data science organizations and as a chief data officer, is that we actually have legislation that makes it a law that every single federal agency hire a chief data officer. And that's really exciting for a couple of reasons, because data is fundamental to understanding what is happening in an agency. And also I would say how innovation takes place in an agency. Chief data officers, if they're aligned with leadership, really have the ability to transform an organization. And that's not just bluster and fancy words. It's absolutely true. Data is what you use to understand what performance is. Data can be used to predict what's going to happen in the future, not only tell you what happened in the past, but what can happen in the future and optimize outcomes. I think in the past, some organizations didn't have anybody who was the focal point and the champion for information and reporting and data. It's very disparate. So therefore you get a lot of different groups reporting on the same numbers sometime and compromising quality. The Open Government Act, by mandating that every agency have a single point of contact within that chief data officer, who hopefully will have the chief data officer like the Department of Education, where you have resources who their whole career is all about data, utilizing data, helping to drive the development of a culture that's data driven. There's a lot of opportunity in the government, as we know, as we're digitizing things. The growth of information, different types of it, to really re-engineer how it is our citizens are supported by the various government agencies. And there is a lot of innovation that the government can get behind through information in its own agencies. You have a lot of the IC community, obviously, NGA, the Air Force, all really great examples of different agencies who have taken all types of data, developed modern architectures to store it, to analyze it, and really leverage it across, across different departments within their agencies. This is a really great question. Most of the time when I'm working with CDOs and other members of their staff, they typically ask me, you know, as we're starting along our data journey, where should we start and how do we get started? And the first thing I say to them is you've really got to think of your data as a strategic asset and leverage it. So what does that mean? When you leverage something, it means you use it to its maximum advantage. So data is more than reporting. Data can be used to predict the future. It can alter outcomes if used appropriately. But you have to have alignment to do all the hard, dirty work that needs to happen. And the dirty work is really, it is getting your arms around the data, what's available, cataloging it, that type of activity. And indeed, that's the majority of most of the work going on right now as we have the federal data strategy and the initial action plans underway. But I haven't heard a lot of conversations about what they're going to do with that data once they have it. And there are research questions that evaluation officers can investigate. You can look at program performance. But the real value and the real transformation that can take place is if a CDO is aligned with leadership and it's recognized that it's a position that can add a lot of value and change how an organization operates. Many organizations, we don't think about business processes, and agencies' mission operations are fundamentally a set of processes that are being managed by an agency. It could be protecting citizens with the armed forces, but it also can be, you know, protecting children and giving equal opportunity to housing, these sorts of things, and HHS. Every agency has their operations, and re-engineering them so that we can provide services to our citizens in a more timely fashion, more accurately, and really understand the implications of policy changes, you need to have good quality data. And data comes from systems. As we deploy new systems that are more digital, so we don't have a lot of manual work or a lot of paperwork, that information is also in different forms, and it can be leveraged. And you need to have a leader that knows how to partner with IT. IT is an enabler. The CDO is somebody that can think in terms of just business and creatively about how data can be leveraged. So in order to do a lot of that work, you do need to partner with your IT counterparts. But thinking of the CDO as somebody who can change operations and add value and really re-engineer how things are done within a mission, that's fundamental, I think, to leveraging and seeing the strategic value of data. This is a really good question. You've probably heard the tired statement, it's all about the data. Well, it really is all about the data. So when you ask the question, you know, how will data impact, you know, the cloud, IT architecture and stuff, I actually think of it, it's the star of the show. If we want to change really how we operate as a country and how our government supports us as citizens, there's a lot of really great fun work to be done. A lot of work in terms of transforming the type of systems that support our agencies, even our warfighters, obviously. And when you think about what you're doing with these new systems, you are creating different types of information that can be leveraged at a moment's notice, right? In a very timely fashion. If we want to do something, for example, like be the leader in AI, in order to be the leader in AI, we have to have systems in place that one can leverage this, that can generate certain information at the volumes and at the speed that it's being generated, and the different types, right? And in order to be able to leverage that data, you have to have a modern architecture. So it's really, you know, the chicken and the egg question. I think of it, you know, you can, if you plan ahead thinking about how you're going to leverage that data before you initiate some sort of digital transformation, you know, a new ERP, or, you know, for the VA, a new electronic health record system. If you think about at the end, those are going to manage your business processes, but how are you going to use the data at the end of the day? And how are you going to be able to share it across your sister organizations that also need that? So that's also an important key thing, is thinking about how data can be shared. And that definitely gets into the question of like what your IT infrastructure looks like. And I dare say sometimes some of these sticky, prickly questions about sharing data, which can be sensitive, obviously, because of privacy concerns, and technology can help facilitate getting over some of those barriers. But the policies and the processes have to be there. And the leadership at the top, again, I keep bringing this up, but leadership at the top really has to, in some ways, push people out of their comfort zones and getting them moving to a direction to really harness these technologies and these practices that we see that most commercial entities are already utilizing and have been for decades.